All right, welcome to the first ever Infinite Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Jared, joined as always with my co-host, Damon. Damon, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Jared. How's it going today?
Good, man. I'm excited for this, the official starting of an era. Today on the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what is Infinite Leadership, who the hell are we, kind of bring some value to it, what are our goals, and this is going to be a long thing. We're going to have to go 20 podcasts deep.
Going long.
Going long, man. So, Damon, let me ask you. I'm going to actually throw you a curveball. I had set up an agenda for this call, but I'm going to throw the agenda away immediately. It was actually to trick you because I want more of like your authentic answer to this question, which is how are we in a podcast going to provide value to the listener, right? We can talk about who we are. We can talk about kind of what our goals are, what our beliefs are, but like why is somebody actually going to want to listen is my question to you.
So why is someone going to want to listen to our podcast? I guess just from one take, it's from being in the workforce now, and from living every day, living the example and the proof of what infinite leadership is and how it works. And applying those real life situations that we live in every single day through our 9 to 5s or 5 to 12s, whatever you want to call it. And I think by us living that and going through it, that value, sharing that value with others is what's going to help us inspire and get people to want to listen. There's I think a demand for real authenticity, and when you're actually living it and going through it, making the mistakes, finding your successes along the way, I think that has a lot of value to people. What do you think?
I completely agree with you. Like the notion of this podcast, right? When we talk about infinite leadership, what does that really mean? And for us, it really stems from, Simon Sinek's book of like infinite leadership and having an infinite mindset, right? So the idea that when you're living kind of in your life and in your work, that you kind of understand the macro view that is happening within yourself, within your organization, within the people that you oversee. So one of the big points for us is really going to be, I think, like kind of what you said, which is failure, right? So as we're going through our career, right, we're trying to really embed these principles in our lives and what we're doing and the way we communicate. And we're going to succeed sometimes with that. We're going to fail sometimes with that. But the concept of really infinite leadership to me means the fact that there's always something to learn when it comes to leadership and kind of people development and really kind of self-development. And so I see us as really being able to provide really crisp stories, data, right? ROI. One of the hardest things to really talk about when it comes to people development and leadership development is, can you prove that ROI? Or is this just like the name on a wall? Like when companies say like, oh, customer is like our value, right? And that's just like printed on their wall. Well, like what does that actually like mean? Like, can you create crisp examples of that value? And can you create crisp examples of that infinite leadership, that infinite mindset for people? And I think that is really kind of what I'm hoping that the value we bring to people at all levels of an organization. So from startup, entrepreneurial, leading a team, right? If you have one employee, how can you lead that one employee? Or if you're overseeing a team of 4, 5, 6, 40, 100, right? How are you able to embed these kind of beliefs and infrastructure in that? How do you succeed and fail in doing that, right?
Yeah, with the shift in people looking for new work and finding new jobs and, like you said, new startups, new companies and stuff like that, I think there is an increasing need for voices and people who understand leadership and understand how to work with people and how to inspire people around them. So I think that this podcast provides us that opportunity to reach a group of people that may even be new to this whole inner workings, but I also think this is going to be good for people that are experienced, that have been running companies, that might need just a little bit different insight, maybe a fresher, younger pair of perspective.
I totally agree. Like the concept of just like being able to really attract people into like the space, right? Because you can't go on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram without like hearing the rumblings of like a great resignation, right? How people are, might not want to work or companies can't pay them or different things like that, or like how to attract top talent. Like that's all I ever see right now, right? It's a conversation that's happening at the Thanksgiving table, whether you like it or not, with very different opinions happening there, you know. And so I think that this is a great opportunity to, one, introduce people, and also two, maybe just to create some security, right? For people who maybe are living out these practices, but maybe aren't getting the recognition that they feel like they should be for living these practices. This is kind of creating a space to where we can really double down on what you're doing with your team is beneficial. And these are the ways that we can show beneficial and bring this to your team and your organization as well. To kind of help support these initiatives, because it's not going away. If anything, it's going to get more, it's going to get stronger, right? There's a huge turn in kind of, you know, organizations and the way they attract talent and how they keep talent, and people are jumping jobs from never before because of really intrinsic motivations, right? Gone are the days of where you're, for example, like my dad, right? Spent 20 years at a company, was head of marketing, did that for the extrinsic value of financially to keep his family safe. Well, that's kind of gone now. A lot of people are jumping jobs quickly. They're more agile. They're more kind of mobile in their life, where they're living, you know, their friends, like in all aspects of that. And I think that with that change in age, there also has to be a change in perspective when it comes to leadership and how that kind of field is changing and becoming increasingly valuable.
Yeah. The other thing I think that will be really exciting in this journey with you is being able to learn from all the other people that we know in our network, and being able to just kind of understand better on what some of these other businesses deal with and what they're going through. You know, you and I are fortunate enough that we've been able to work with a lot of different business owners. We've been able to do a little bit of consulting here and there, and understand what people are going through. And I think being able to provide a platform for people to share that out loud and to kind of talk that through will provide so much value to just a random person that catches this podcast, or even someone within our social networks.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think the mistake that a lot of people make when they talk about these concepts is that they think that they are a voice in this, like that they have like the key to leadership development and the key to people development. And you think that that's a very micro and kind of narrow mindset, right? And so I think one of the things that we want to do is to bring others into this podcast forum, because, you know, we aren't the expert in every category. We have beliefs, we have likes, we try to constantly improve on ourselves. But at a certain time, if we were to, example, talk about vulnerability, I don't know if that we have the science behind that and articulate it correctly. And so being able to bring in people who are at the top of their field in it, who can kind of talk and give that second and third level of conversation is something that I'm interested in. And I think what that's going to do is it's going to keep it fresh for the listener, that they're not just listening to two guys who think they know about leadership, but rather people with extensive histories in specific topics. So that's something that I'm really kind of excited about, and our own personal learning when it comes to this, right? So one of the back end reasons that we're starting this podcast is also because it's going to force us to learn, right? It's going to force us to read leadership books, right? Leading Below the Surface. Like, what does that mean? It's going to force me to read a book like Creating a Company Culture, right? And so I think that is really an opportunity for us to kind of extend our knowledge, and this forum is going to force us to do that, right? Can't come to this podcast without having a really concrete plan and really the data that shows behind that.
Yeah, exactly. I think on here first, you kind of started with what is an infinite leadership, but I think before we dive into that, I would like to kind of talk a little bit about who we are. So Jared, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's dive a little bit into who you are, what you're doing now, just kind of where all this starts for you.
Yeah, perfect. I've kind of started the journey of like leadership development about 7 years ago. To give kind of some perspective, like coming out of high school, like I wasn't really great at anything. I wasn't great at math. I wasn't a science student. You know, I liked English, but like I know 2 languages and I know neither of them well, I say, right? So my writing in English wasn't great. And really out of high school, growing up, I was super, super ill, right, in my life. And that really allowed me to create kind of some perspective in my life and understand what's valuable and what's not valuable. And so I eventually actually flunked out of high school, if you can believe that or not. A lot of people are always shocked when I kind of talk about that. But yeah, I missed 90 days of my junior year, 120 days in my senior year, right? And so we want to talk about becoming vulnerable and having to really pick yourself up from your bootstraps. It was a huge change in my life when I finally got out of like that high school era and had to kind of pursue, other things in my life. the first thing I did right out of high school, was that I didn't know what I wanted to do in college. So I went right into sales. I sold dog food. I sold rugs, like high-end like rugs, and I eventually landed in the fitness industry. And that was where I met you as my former boss. And that was really the awakening of kind of the fact that this is what I'm good at. This is my why in life, right? To create impactful, learning development conversations and create impact on company cultures. And so once I realized that was really kind of where my gift landed, it felt like my whole life had clarity all of a sudden, right? A big alarm clock moment during my journey was obviously when we were working in the sales field, and I made the realization that I loved training the person to do the big sale more than I liked doing the big sale myself and getting that recognition, right? And you'll know that kind of managing me, that it wasn't really about me being in the top 10 for sales performers, right? It was about me and having an additional employee with me in that top 10. And as a team, what were we kind of doing? And when I made that connection, I had to switch my whole life, right? Leaving sales, now going into the HR field, going into kind of company culture, going into organizational development, organizational change, how to manage those processes. And that's ultimately where I'm kind of landing now, which is in kind of a culture development, organizational development type role with a startup tech company.
Yeah. Big story. Your path, for me to watch you come on board and then go to where you are now, huge. The way that you're able to adapt, recognize where your strengths are, where you find your happiness, and how you want to inspire others with your leadership skills. I thought that was a pretty phenomenal path that you took there.
Yeah, it looks good in hindsight, but in the middle of it, you don't know. It's like that old famous picture where they're like mining, right? And the person turns back from mining when the diamonds are like just on the other side, but the person's just happy with the journey, and like they know that eventually they'll hit it. And it was hard at sometimes, but now looking back on it, right, it totally makes sense on why everything kind of happened for me. And I'm the happiest I've ever been, right, after going through all those kind of trials and, tribulations. What about yourself, right?
Yeah.
You walked in, you were working in sales. This 6'2", 130-pound kid walks up to you and says, "Hey, I want a job." How did you end up there?
Oh man, I don't even remember how that ended up. So I know when you'd walked in talking about a job or whatever. All I remember is it was me and the assistant manager at the time, Lena, who maybe we can have on here sometime soon. All I remember is she was very hyped up, very excited to bring you on. And I was a little bit hesitant, of course. I was very, very infant in my leadership skills, mind you. So I was very quick to judge a book by its cover, very uncertain on what those risks of bringing a 6'2", 130-pound kid on to try to take on the sales challenges that we had. And of course, working in fitness, sales is quite a prevalent thing. I'm sure a lot of people know that. I don't know if your video's still on.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, cool. But either way, that whole process was pretty eye-opening to me, and that kind of helped me develop, I think, more of my leadership skills as well. And then you want me to dive a little bit into myself?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you doing right now? Like, what kind of motivates you in your current role, and why do you feel like you have great examples to bring to this podcast?
Yeah. So as of now, I manage a team of 5 managers. Each of them have about 10 employees underneath them, still working in the fitness industry as of right now. Also doing a little bit of real estate on the side, a little bit of business consulting on the side as well. And then I have a few other ventures I'm going to be getting into. But as far as the value I feel like I can bring alongside you on this podcast, it's really just a perspective of understanding the evolution of where most leaders start, which is very amateur, very selfish in their ways, very self-centered. And I think that's where most great leaders start. But then eventually they get inspired by the people around them. And they find that it's always a bigger picture. It's not always just going to be about yourself. It's oftentimes about the path you're able to lead others down. And, you know, when you're able to take other people down a path of success, I think those moments warrant stories of themselves. And I think those moments are meant to be shared. So this podcast, I think, will give us an opportunity and give me an opportunity to just kind of share those perspectives, to kind of share those stories, those trials, those tribulations. I'd love to say everything has just been a ride up, but I'm very proud of where I've gotten so far in my career. Very proud of where I'm headed. And I think that all the mistakes that I've made along the way and figuring out how to be a better leader, I think this is all value that other people can learn, whether they're younger than us, older than us, whether they're in a new business, whether they're taking over a business and trying to keep it afloat. I think there's a lot of value that we're going to be able to provide people just from the perspectives that we've gone through together.
Yeah. And I think we should really start there, right? With kind of our journey and the transition that we both had in our life. So let's kind of go back and set the scene, right? So I talked a little bit about my life, like transitioning, out of high school into sales. And I ended up walking into the gym because a buddy of mine asked me to work out with him, right? At that time, I was lifting really, really heavy rugs, like these huge, like 12 by 13 rugs that, I was in Florida, like I'm based in Florida. And so these grandmothers would come and they would decorate their house with these huge rugs. I'd help them kind of align it and things like that. And I kind of loved that part of my job of like the hard work that I was getting and like the exercise. And, growing up as a kid who was 6'2" and 130 pounds, I mean, string bean, right? So I walk into this gym and I see an opportunity to get into this industry. And more of like a life kind of development role. Like I wanted to develop myself physically, but really what ended up happening was I developed myself kind of mentally and kind of professionally, more so, which is an interesting point to have. So I joined, your team. I come in the interview, right? I'm 6'2", right? Bright-eyed, bushy tail, has never really worked in like a deep level of sales, but has been told that like, people tend to like me, right? I had success selling dog food, had success selling rugs to people, pretty personable. And I joined your team in the sales team. And one of the things that are kind of interesting is that the volume that you have in the fitness industry in terms of sales, and also the level of emotional intelligence that it takes to really get into somebody's insecurities when it comes to their personal development, was a nook that I was able to really kind of learn and adapt. And so I think like during that time, you also took a huge transition. And I think it's valuable to talk about that transition that you had from a beginning manager who had a really kind of hustle belief, right? Cold calling is life. Like we're just going to hustle to get our sales goals, into this transition of more of like an infinite mindset, leader of people that just so happens to be doing sales and creating a vision. And so I want to stay on that point from your development and maybe how it came from my influence, and also how you kind of made that transition in your career that ultimately led you to being way more successful, in the long run. And I think that that's an important story.
Yeah. So I guess to your point, cold calling and lead generation, things like that, all the various essentials of any business, right? Of being able to get yourself new clients or members in that case at a gym. But then as far as like how that transition and how that leadership kind of transformed, I think once you realize that numbers are all arbitrary, numbers come and go, numbers will be up, they'll be down. But then you realize that the team and the people you put yourself around are what helps you get those numbers that you are really thriving and striving for. So I think the transformation that you're alluding to really just happened at a moment when, you and I and a few other people, we had all sat down and we had analyzed like performance from the previous months and stuff like that. And when you realize it's just a hamster wheel of consistently playing catch up, right? You do really, really well. The month is done. You hit your goal. Next month starts. It all starts from scratch. You build it all back up again. You hit your goal over and over and over. So I think once that realization of, okay, this is a hamster wheel, and then once seeing the faces of the people on our team, and they have that same realization of, wow, we did all this work and now we have to start all over again. I think that really was an eye opener. And it kind of puts you in a perspective as a leader where you realize I can't keep running in this hamster wheel and thinking that everyone around me is going to be just as bought in and invested in doing this same hamster wheel with me over and over and over again. Right? No matter how I'm bonused, no matter how I'm incentivized, I can't expect that everyone around me, my entire team, will just want to keep going on this hamster wheel without real purpose or without real drive. So I think that was the turning point. I don't know if you might recall a few situations we had like that, but the moment that it stops becoming about hitting your goals and hitting your quotas, but it becomes more about developing everyone that's around you and helping them become the best professionals they can be, I think that moment for me was a big turning point to realizing there's a lot more to this big game that we call leadership. It's not just about hitting these targets.
Yeah, I almost want to let that kind of breathe for a second, right? That was such an instrumental part in your development and my development. I remember, working in the sales field and we had really a huge influx of talent at that time kind of come into the team. And we had a huge exiting of like former employees as well, like leaving this team. And so you had basically the most talented team you've ever had kind of as a manager. On top of that, they're all new, right? So they're talented, but they're raw and they're new. And so the conversation from that hamster wheel, it's not going to work, right? You have to kind of broaden your development of the people to the point to where you can create, little leaders, for example, in the organization who can then train the people who are coming in, who can kind of help support you in kind of your goals at a long term. And I think that realization in your life was honestly probably a little brutal, right? Feeling kind of vulnerable, like you just had this entire new team come in. They're really talented. You're having like everything that's worked for you in the past is not working right now, but the month is still happening and sales need to be hit and quotas need to be hit and bonuses are on the line, right? And so how did you navigate that transition from saying, hey, we're doing things and this is how we do it, to now, wow, I need to become a person developer because I know that there's a special opportunity here in the long run to set myself up for long-term success?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think having a big macro perspective, and what's funny about that is you kind of said it, like it transformed the way that I behave in a lot of things. I think when you look at everything from more of a macro view, you start to realize, everything really just needs to function well, and people around you need to feel purposeful, like there's some meaning behind what they're doing. And I think that was the big wake-up call. When you make a shift from a micro, hit this number, hit this target, to a macro view where it's like, okay, what Jared's doing right now, how is this helping his personal development? What that next employee is doing, how is that going to help them when they're not working with me, right? If they move on to another career, if Jared goes to school and gets his degree and starts working for another company, how are all these skills that we're doing right now, how can I make these skills transferable to whatever he's going to do going forward? So I think it's really just that. It's just, again, it's empowering the people around you. It's just finding ways to inspire people. And I think that's kind of what you and I were able to find together is, we got to create a situation for people that they feel like they're growing as people. And when people feel empowered that way, when people feel like you're investing in them, they will 99.9% always want to give you that return on investment for whatever you're trying to chase as well. So I think that was a very, very big turning point when we worked together. Do you recall, what, I guess for you, like experiencing it, right? Like, what is it like when you see a leader who is just so tunnel vision and just so singularly focused on the micro to change into such a macro leader? What is that perspective like?
Yeah, that is the irony, right? Which is to say when we lead with that infinite mindset of personal development, we think that we won't get that ROI or that the sales will lack, or that, we took less calls today because I'm spent time personally training this person. And so that's more of a macro view. that is the irony, which is on the other side, I became one of the highest performers, right? Through my development. And so the moment that you made that transition, it was infectious, right? It was infectious for the whole team to have a new mindset, which is that we are about people development here, and sales is what we do, right? Sales is the work, but people are the brand, right, of this organization where we worked in this location. And that led itself to being better at sales, right? Having more quality training, more investment in the team. And when you had this talented team, all of a sudden this talent becomes bought in, right? And talent is one of the hardest things to come by, in this kind of age of the great resignation. And when you develop that talent, they're more loyal, right? I started wanting to perform not because of my external sales incentives, but because I wanted you in the company to succeed because you cared about my development, right? And that's how you when I left, in just great graces, was because I knew that this time for me was about my life. It wasn't about the job, right? It wasn't about the turnover and hitting that last goal, right? All of a sudden, that mentality is infectious, right? And so making that extra phone call, right? Spending that extra 5 minutes with the customer and truly caring about what they need and kind of supporting them leads itself to the highest functioning sales team that we had, right? Number one in the region for almost every month, and it was because that we were developing people. We weren't pushing a product.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So when you went and you had that kind of realization in your life that hey, I have this super talented team, and there was pushback from you as a manager, right? The talented team was saying, hey, we're not happy. We feel like this is a hamster wheel. We feel like we can't develop ourselves. Did that put you at kind of make you take a step back, right? And did it make you feel vulnerable during that time that your whole team was pushing you to really be a better manager yourself, and that was something that you never had happen before in your career?
Yeah, I think the crazier part about that though is you don't realize that that's actually what's going on and that's what's happening. Sometimes we take pushback from subordinates or people that we manage, and we think that they just don't want to change, or they're just being difficult, or they don't see it the way I see it. They don't understand, right? But I think the most crucial component in that situation, really, Jared, was listening. And this is something that I think we're going to be able to provide a lot of people insight on. When you really deep down try to listen and try to empathize, and you really try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and you really try to understand where they're coming from, not just what they're saying, why they're saying it, but where they're coming from. I think you start to understand that everyone really wants whatever they're doing. They want the business they're working at to do well, right? I'm a firm believer no one shows up to do a bad job, right? No one takes a job to do a bad job. Oftentimes bad leaders are the reason for that. So if we start to look at, and for that situation for me, when I started to look at, wow, these individuals are all very driven individuals, and they want nothing but the best, and they want to see me do well. They want to see the company do well. I think it was at that moment I had to realize that, okay, I need to do a better job listening to them. It's not that you guys were turned off or upset, or, you were caught up in the hamster wheel per se. But if I didn't do a better job of, stepping back and looking at everything from a larger perspective, I was at risk of losing a really, really good team. And when you've had to rebuild the team over and over again, like I've had to back in the day, you don't want to go back down that path again. So I think it was a rude awakening, but it was also a necessary awakening. And it kind of just opened my eyes to realizing, these guys, they all want to work hard. Like you wanted to do a really good job. You wanted to work hard. You wanted to grow in your professional career. Even though some months you just maybe weren't as happy with how things were going and how the company might have decided on things, I think at the end of the day, you really just wanted to bring good value. So I think the ability to step back and listen is really key there. And I think that's something that we can teach others, through this messaging and through our podcast and through everything that we're looking forward to doing.
Yeah. I mean, sales is an infinite game, right? Like we talked a lot about the hamster wheel and how it doesn't matter how great you did the month prior, right? When the end of the quarter comes, when the end of the month comes and you know, you make it over the line, you're starting right back at zero. And so how do you inspire a team to feel like they can come back, right? Even stronger than they were the month before. And that doesn't happen through hitting the goal. It happens through hitting developmental points in their life. So when I started to see success in terms of my ability to communicate with customers, all of a sudden the confidence that I got made me a better trainer, right? To other team members on my team, right? And when I felt intrinsically inspired to see the success of the company through my own development, I became inspired to train others along the team. And that's kind of what we were touching on when it comes to an infectious environment where people who are at the highest level feel like they can take a second to communicate what is working and what is not working to both their manager, but also to those below them. And so when we talk about a horizontal kind of company structure where, you know, they're able to give feedback and input at all levels, that was really what was starting to happening, where you felt like you had to come down to the level of our team and hear all input from everyone so that we could eventually create speed. And speed was the real differentiating factor with our team. We weren't worried about who was getting the commission. We weren't worried about, you know, who got the sale, who got the credit, what was happening out externally, right? Decisions from our, you know, from corporate. It was all about our team. What are we doing as a team? What are we doing to help each other and develop as a team? And so what that created was almost really as weird as it sounds, it created a team environment, right? All of a sudden we were, for example, a football team with one common goal. And it didn't matter who was getting that credit. And so fostering that environment, it takes time to do. What did you feel like was the biggest kind of, you know, important part of fostering that environment from your perspective? And how did you actually implement that to happen? Or did it happen by accident?
I think a mix of both. I think it kind of just happened by trial and error. So in the sense of accidents, I think it kind of just, we stumbled into it in a way. But I think it was also, when I say stumbled into it, I think there are a lot of obstacles and a lot of stepping stones and areas that we not only were able to cross, but we were also able to trip over. And then I think by tripping over certain things and stepping over certain things, I think we eventually rolled our way into that situation. You know, something that you actually just said there is very important. And as I stay on the topic of rolling into that, how we got into that, right? I think one of the best quotes that I've been reading recently is momentum solves 80% of your problems. Right? That's by John C. Maxwell. So momentum solves 80% of your problems. So I think once you start to get that momentum, and it all starts with the people underneath you, or the people that you work for technically, right? Because as a leader, in true leadership, servant leadership, you manage up, right? So I think it's very important to realize that. So once you get that momentum and you start listening to everyone around you and you start finding your way, and you realize, like, I'm not taking this journey alone, right? Like, yes, these are my goals. Yes, these are my targets. And yes, these are employees who I've employed to help me hit these targets. At the end of the day, it's our target. It's our goal. It's our mission. So I think once you start to look at it as something that you share with them, I think that kind of helps you see that momentum and roll that way into it. And I think in our story, in our situation, that was really it. It's just really all of us getting together, trying to have, you know, the right dialogue, the right conversation about it, trying to align with what we're trying to accomplish and just setting out to do that. But, you know, there's power in numbers. So as long as you have that momentum on your side, I think things usually work out the way they should.
They talk about a concept of freeze and unfreeze when it comes to organizational change. So when you have a project, for example, and you get the project kind of over the line and you want to iterate on the project, but you know that it's not the time within the company, whether that is financial, infrastructural, you know, team-wise, you just can't handle the load. They talk about freezing that concept or freezing that, you know, function. And I think that what you're explaining is also what is happening within teams, which is you had to take a portion of your time. And I know it was right before January, which is a huge sales month for gyms, right? Everyone's starting the new year. There's an influx of people. There's an influx of people trying for their first time. And what you had to do was you had to freeze in November and December. And you know what was funny was that you thought in your head like, hey, we need to freeze and we might take some lumps in November and December in order to go extremely fast in January when there's a huge influx. But when you freezed and when you transitioned to starting to develop the people, the sales in November and December, they didn't lose, right? They didn't fall off. We hit target in those months as well. And I think that sometimes leaders are scared to change momentum because they feel like they will not hit their current goal. But what actually happened was that the momentum that you talk about, it didn't change. If anything, you just poured gasoline on the fire. Right? We were able as a team to handle both because the members of that team wanted to handle both, right? They wanted that new environment, and they knew in order to get that new environment that they had to also hit these targets because it would prove ROI. And I think developing a team is really, really hard to prove ROI on. How do you prove that the training that you're doing is effective, that it's scalable, that your team is going to then, be able to go out and execute on it? And that is really the key when it comes to any cultural development when you're trying to create buy-in, which is we need to prove that we can freeze and we can take time to develop our people. And that is not going to combat a failure in hitting targets, no matter what organization is, whether it's operational targets, whether that it's customer success targets, right? If we're developing people, for example, on the customer success team, they're going to feel that development, which is going to make them execute better with their customers. And that is the irony. So, for example, let me talk to you about, there's this great study that happened back in the 60s. It was from workers on the line, right? So during the war, there was, a huge focus on kind of getting people on the line to create, wartime, vehicles and infrastructure for that. And they wanted to know, how can I make the production line more efficient, right? How can we make these people be able to pump out more during wartime? And so what they did, for example, was they dimmed the lights, right? And when they dimmed the lights, workers got higher production. And then they turned the lights back on. But the production went even higher after they turned it back on. And they were confused. Like, why? Like, what is the trigger that's happening? Is it the lower lights for the team? Is the upper lights? And what ended up happening was that it had nothing to do with the lights. What had made the workers better was the fact that they were trying to help them be more productive. It wasn't the fact of turning the light off and on. It was the fact that they were willing to try things to help them, right? And I think that is a real sticking point for a lot of managers, where you have to accept that this is an infinite game, and I'm going to try, I'm going to fail, I'm going to reiterate, but knowing that when you try something new, that your people will, one, see that, and two, they will push you over the line to make sure you can hit those goals because they want you to continue to develop them and develop your functions. And so I just love that story and how that, even back then, right, there's always something to learn. It's always changing, and just the lens that you look at it is really the only thing, but the principles have always been there.
Yeah, that's a really good story. I mean, when you think about production, in that sense, like back in, you said the 70s, when you think about production in that sense, and, how do you drive production? How do you drive performance? And it's as simple as just providing those resources for people to do as good of a job as they can do and providing that support. And I think as we continue to get through this episode and we get through these other ones as well, I think something that we're going to continue to reiterate is that, as leaders, our obligation and our duty, if we want a successful business, is to provide unlimited support. Right? Oftentimes leaders aren't always just going to be the best performers and the people that sell the most and do the most, but oftentimes they're the people that provide the most support so people around them feel like they can succeed. And I think that story that you just provided right there, the difference of turning lights on and turning lights off, I think really it's just about the leadership and the support that person's providing to them is really the difference maker.
Yeah, and that was enough. So I think this is a good time to kind of transition to what are our goals when it comes to this podcast. We're getting closer to the end. What are you hoping that people get out of this podcast, and what do you want our goals really to be when it comes to each episode and also from each other? Maybe that's a great place to have. Let's have this open forum on the podcast so people can see how that looks to Rumble.
No, definitely. So with this Infinite Leadership podcast, I think the main goal, at least for me, on my level is I want to be able to learn from people that we speak to. I want to be able to understand, what's making all these machines tick out there, right? All these different businesses that are out there, all the networks that you and I have, all the people that we know. I think the goal in doing a podcast like this is really just to be able to learn, to understand, and to better adjust, so that way we can help others that are listening. There's going to be a group of people that are an audience that are listening that we can help. There's going to be a group of people that we talk to that we can provide insight to as well. But I also think, it's a stepping stone in the right direction. I feel like there's a need for voices that have a perspective like we have. A lot of people are just, like I said, they're stuck in that hamster wheel and they never take time to step out and actually observe what's going on. So I think along the way, even when you look on LinkedIn, you look at some of the posts and the surveys and the polls that go out, you can tell there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of people that want to be great leaders and they're just not taking the time, or they don't have the tools and the resources to understand how to make that happen. So for me, that's the big goal. I think it's just influence and inspiration to everyone around us, but I also think I can be influenced and inspired and learn from others. So I'm super excited for that forum and that public forum of talking and conversation and dialogue. But I'd like to know from you, what are your goals with doing this podcast? What would you like to accomplish in making this thing a vision?
I echo a lot of what you said when it comes to just, what's out there and people who crave leadership. And that's what I think too, because that's who I was, right? I was somebody who was craving leadership, right? I started with the Gary Vee, the hustle culture. I transitioned more into the Simon Sinek, Brene Brown space. And now I'm leaving that and kind of creating my own theory based off of my personal practices. And I'm expanding that knowledge, right? And I think that that's really what I'm looking to do, which is to help support people and have them understand that the feelings that they're feeling when it comes to their company or their job or their team, like those feelings are valid. If you're feeling like your team is working on the micro and it's a hamster wheel and that you're struggling to create perspective within your team, that's a valid feeling, and that's something that's happening all across organizations all over. So I think what I want to do is create a space where people can feel as though they can come to it and know that, hey, I haven't quite hit this mindset or this, it hasn't seeped through my organization yet, but I know that this is a space where that aligns with kind of this new era of leadership, and that I can come here and that I can learn from it. I mean, from personally, I think this podcast, what it's going to do is that it's going to force you and I to develop, right? If we know that we have certain topics that are coming up in kind of the next episodes, it's going to force us to research those topics, to bring quality, and that's only going to help our own personal development, right? So I think there's two kind of sides of this. There's the opportunity to inspire, to create thought leadership, to make people feel like this is a space where they can communicate that. And there's also this personal belief where we can become better ourselves and through learning, because that is what it's about, right? It's about continuing to learning in leadership, that there's an infinite amount to learn and that we have to constantly reiterate, constantly, reintroduce concepts and constantly improve on who we are as leaders, right? And, the audience can learn that and see that development in us.
Yeah. Well put.
Yeah. Great. Well, this is the first episode here. What you'll notice from listening is that there's also already 2 more episodes. So if you made it all the way through here, please give it a like, share it with somebody who you feel like likes leadership and would be interested in this, and then go ahead and check out episode 2 because it's already up. You don't have to wait. We want to make sure that there was enough content right when we launched so that people felt like, hey, if they were on fire for it, hey, here's the content to enjoy. So go ahead and check out the next episode here, and we look forward to talking more.
Thanks for listening.